And this is Scaling Clean, the podcast for clean economy CEOs, investors, and the people who advise them. I'm your host, Melissa Baldwin. Each show, we bring you usable insights from tested leaders that you can apply to the business of running your business. The U.S. grid is running out of room. Experts say we'll need to double or even triple transmission capacity by 2050 to meet energy demand and reliability goals. By early 2025, the interconnection queue had grown past 2.6 terawatts of proposed generation and storage. That's nearly double the total installed capacity of the grid today. My guest, Jan Andersen, is one of the people working to change that. As the CEO and founder of Jubilee Transmission, Jan was a part of the team that brought on the SunZia and Western Spirit transmission lines. Jan, welcome to the show. So glad to have you here with me on Scaling Clean.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Excellent. So we always start our shows by asking about your company. Tell me a little bit more about Jubilee Transmission and what you do.
Yeah, we are a small transmission developer that was founded about 2.5 years ago by a handful of people who had been doing transmission in various other capacities in other places. Myself, I came from Pattern Energy, and I think you mentioned I had the pleasure of working on SunZia and Western Spirit. Others came from Nextera, a few other Pattern people. And we had for a while been talking about looking at the grid more holistically rather than from a generation perspective, and look at it from a utility and need perspective. And what could we do to build primarily shorter lines, think sort of 50 to 100 miles, that can interconnect systems or help shore up reliability within existing systems as the load growth is increasing over the next several decades. So that's really how we came about. We were fortunate enough to find some people who believed in that same vision, and we were able to raise some money so we can go off and do that development. And really what we focus on is the early stage development, taking the risk that utilities typically can't take in terms of early stage and land, environmental studies, et cetera, and de-risking those projects for the utilities and other potential buyers of the projects. And then we'll take them all the way through the end if that's what they'd like to do. But typically, we would not own and operate the projects. We believe that utilities are really well set up to operate projects. We are really good at developing projects. So, it typically is a really good match.
So I'm curious there, is your customer then the utility, or is it the developer, or is it a little bit of both?
It's a little bit of both. We like to think that the end customer likely is the utility, but because we are focused primarily on early stage projects, sometimes we'll end up partnering with a larger developer, i.e. a Pattern, a LS Power, a Grid Alliance, that'll come in and maybe acquire the project from us sort of at an earlier stage, and they'll take it through to completion. Or we'll take it all the way ourselves. We're somewhat nimble and flexible as far as that's concerned. Our main priority, honestly, is just to get projects developed as fast as we can and get them into the hands of the people that are going to operate them.
Well, on that note on speed, I know that interconnection queues are a huge problem. And so you're adding that capacity, helping them connect to the grid. So I can see the value there. So how did you become a CEO?
We flipped a coin. No, I think, I've been in this business for almost 20 years. I think like most people that have been around that long have sort of advanced through the ranks over time into leadership positions. And as we set about, my co-founder and I, Matt Langley, founding this company, his strength lies very much in the origination, the power marketing, a lot of technical aspects of development. And mine maybe lies a little bit more on the greenfield and permitting side, but also the sort of overall organization of an organization. And so, we're a very flat organization as far as that's concerned. The CEO title, it sounds nice and fancy, but we're a small company. So I spend a considerable amount of time in the field as well. And everybody sort of dives in and just solves problems together. I think that's one of our strengths, that, no one says, well, that's not part of my responsibility or that's not my job. We're a company of 13 people, so everyone crosses over and everyone works together and seems to be working pretty well.
Actually, on that note, I want to ask you, what do you think the role of the CEO should be in the company?
That's a good question. I think it depends very much on the company itself. We can take Jubilee as an example, and I've been involved with other startups in the past, not in the energy space, but in tech. I think early stage CEO's job is to collect a really, really strong team. I think it's working with the investors and shareholders. I think it's setting the tone and the culture for the company. And I think, frankly, it's diving in and not being afraid to get your hands dirty and set an example in that way. I think sometimes being the head of HR is also part of that responsibility. I think it's a little bit of everything, but understanding when to step in and when to get out of the way. I think as a company evolves, that role changes. I had the pleasure of working for Mike Garland at Pattern as an example. I thought he was just a wonderful, fantastic CEO who was very personable, and I truly believe he knew everybody's name in an organization of 600 people, but he was also very good at delegating out the responsibilities to his leadership team and sort of focus very much on the high level part, which is the, working on the business versus working in the business.
Speaking of that, in your previous work, do you have any mentors who stick out to you when you look back at your career? Is there anybody who you want to share what they taught you with our audience?
Yeah, I think I could name a lot. I've been very fortunate throughout my career, both in and outside of energy. Very early on in my 20s, sort of still had long hair and earrings and a big bushy beard. Couldn't quite figure out what I wanted to do in life, and there was a family friend of ours who had been quite successful in life and was really kind enough to take me under his wing and hired me into a company, gave me a lot of responsibility early on, let me make mistakes. I think he always knew when to draw the line and pull me back in, which was helpful, so I didn't hang myself entirely. But I think having that opportunity to make the mistakes and then sort of be pushed forward still and not necessarily put in the corner for it was really helpful early on. As I transitioned into energy, one person that especially comes to mind is Sarah Webster. Sarah, I have worked for twice now, and we have a very close relationship. I hired her to be my boss at my first wind company job. I was very early on with Tom Carnahan in Wind Capital Group and sort of running local permitting, outreach campaigns, marketing, brand, and such. And as the company grew, I think everyone but me realized that the job was getting a little too big for my experience. But they were kind enough to make me part of the interview process. And to me at that time, Sarah just stood up so far beyond every other candidate. It was a great choice by the company to hire her. And she has really taught me a lot over the years, not just in terms of the craft itself, but also how to operate within a large organization, how to both manage up and down. She's just such a wonderful resource overall in terms of knowledge and network and everything else you could want.
That's terrific. Well, and just to add to that, if you could go back in time and give advice to your younger self, that long-haired, bearded young man, what advice would you give to yourself, Yen?
I'm not necessarily a believer in looking backwards in that sense. I think we are all where we are today because of choice or circumstance or luck or fortune, whatever it is. And I feel very fortunate to be where I am today. I think I have always made choices that felt like the right choice, not so much the one that maybe papered out as the right choice. I don't know that there's a whole lot I would change, but that's my personality, right? I left college and took off and traveled for 2 years around the world and, you know, ran up a bunch of debt that I had to then come back and paid off. And everybody asked me, well, why did you do that? Why didn't you go get a job at, Enterprise Rent-A-Car or insurance? And, My answer was always like, I can do that anytime. Like, I can come back in 5 years and get that job, but I wouldn't have the experiences, and I would have felt like I cheated myself out of something. And so that's typically just how I approach life in general.
I think that's super cool. So you got to go travel the world after school. That's incredible.
I spent about 10 months working on a cattle station in the Australian outback. And so that was a pretty great experience, driving cattle and shearing sheep and that sort of thing.
That's super cool. Very neat. So when we were talking before this interview, we talked about clean energy's blind spot. What do you think the industry has to learn, or what do you notice and as we mature?
Yeah, I mean, I think I want to preface this with, it's always easy to be critical, right? I think the industry has done a lot that is really, really good. I think there are a lot of really talented people in this industry that are doing this for all the right reasons. I also think that the all the right reasons get in the way sometimes. It's certainly in the past, but I think that's still true to some degree, that the overall feeling in the industry is that we are in the right. We are doing the noble thing. We are sort of saving the world from itself and from climate change and all of these other things. And therefore, it is not fair when people are mean to us, and everyone should just agree with that and make the same sacrifices that we are making for the greater good. And I think it's what gets us in trouble a lot. Very obvious example is, having cozied up to one party for a very long time whilst ignoring the other. I think we also have seen that in the local communities. I think it has taken way too long to understand that opposition are playing to win while we are playing to be right. Maybe they believe in global warming, but it is so far down the list of priorities for a landowner or a rural community member, who are just thinking about, like tending to their fields or their livestock, or, frankly, just making ends meet, right? I think we have lacked an appreciation for that as an industry for a long time. And I think that has given far too many openings to organized or nefarious opposition. They play hardball, right? They get their nose dirty. They're not afraid to, and the burden of proof is not on them, right? And we as an industry, and again, I'm generalizing, right? But we as an industry love to show up with fact sheets, right? And say, hey, but look, like EMS, not right. Like, there's no wind turbine cancer, right? Listen to us. But it just doesn't work, right? That's not how human nature works. And I think we missed the part where all of this, as ugly as it sounds, is really transactional, right? We are asking someone to take on a burden. And whether we think there's a tax base that's beneficial or not, it is still a burden. And the reality is that, yes, that tax base goes into the schools and local fire departments, whatever it is, and landowners get payments and all of that stuff. 80% of those communities never see the benefit of that, right? They don't feel that. And I think we miss that. I think we miss it locally. I think we miss it politically. And I certainly think we miss it, sort of on a policy level. We need to be very careful about how we talk about things, and are we really being genuine about it, right? For years, the industry has sort of touted the wind technician is the fastest growing job in America. Well, yeah, maybe percentage-wise, but, if you had 5 yesterday and you have 10 tomorrow, that's pretty impressive percentage-wise, right? But it still is not like this massive collection of people necessarily. And I'm not trying to belittle it or say that it's small, because it continues to grow, but it is disingenuous in some ways, right? And I think that's where we get ourselves in trouble, because we become just too easy targets. I will add one more thing, and I'm sorry, it's a very long answer.
Keep going. You're speaking our love language.
We don't spend enough money. We just don't. We've been around for a few decades now. We are owned by massive multinational conglomerates. Like God forbid somebody spends, the cost of a turbine annually on local community engagement, right? Like it's the last thing anyone thinks of until it's too late. I think the same thing goes for political giving or just campaigning in general. We can watch everybody else spend like crazy, and maybe we can't compete with oil and gas, but like we're not even on the playing field. And I think that is a very, very sore blind spot for this industry and frankly, the leaders of many of the organizations in this industry that they just like won't do it. It's sad. It's not great, but it is pay to play. And if you don't pay, you don't get to play.
Boy, you just said so many things, Yen, that really register with the topics that we've been talking about at TigerCom. I'm going to quote another colleague in the industry who said, if you've ever gotten to a battle with your spouse, did you pull out a fact sheet to win that battle? The answer is no.
I've never won that battle. I wouldn't.
So it's not going to work. We have a long way to go, as you said, in investing both in the politics and investing in our local communities. And if you look at the ratio of what other developers are spending in terms of community engagement, you see that we're being outspent in both cases. So I think we see more developers waking up to this and really paying attention as projects are getting canceled at scary rates, quite frankly.
Moratoriums,
so,
right? I mean,
yeah.
that's a lot of that could have been avoided by investing into the communities and into the campaigns, but it wasn't, right? And a lot of it again goes back to, but we're in the right.
Well, and I still hear from developers and people in the industry too who say, well, we don't want to be political. And the answer is whether you do it or not, like politics is doing you.
Energy, any type of infrastructure, it is political by nature.
Well said, Yen. You mentioned moratoriums. You're dealing with transmission lines. How is that different or the same than some of these renewable projects?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a pretty substantial difference between wind and solar and then linear development, basically, which is what we're doing. Obviously, it depends on especially the length and location of a line. But whereas oftentimes with a wind farm, a solar installation, a storage for that matter, you're dealing with one, maybe two counties. We're dealing with 5 or 6. And where you can move a turbine a little bit to get off somebody's property, if you got to tack around somebody on a transmission line, like, every mile you have to do that is another $3-4 million, right? If you're dealing with multiple counties and states for that matter, those are a lot of additional negotiations, and you have to always be conscious of whatever you offer up over here, you're going to have to offer up over here as well, right? Because they all talk. We are not yet seeing the same sort of outspoken, very vocal, very visible local oppositions necessarily. You get oppositions along the way, and the ENGOs typically will show up. But if you cite this correctly, right, and you cite it next to an existing line, the impact tends to be a lot smaller, and so you tend to deal with less opposition. For all the things that we can criticize, I also do feel that this current administration is the first one to genuinely try to do something about permit reform. And I think they are far less concerned about pleasing everybody in the room than they are with just getting it done. And I think that has been some of the downfall in the past, is there are so many people at the table, so many interests that previous administrations have tried to serve, that it just all falls apart.
Is there any specific policy that relates to that, to transmission siting, that you're following?
I wouldn't say that there is any one specifically that we're paying attention to. We like to think that we pay attention to all of them, and we are fortunate in the sense that we are small and we're nimble. So there are very few things that we can't look at and find an advantage to. No matter which way it falls, because we don't have, any one philosophy that we have to follow.
Nice. I'm going to transition now to a different topic. I want to talk about hiring and firing. So you mentioned you're a smaller company. Do you still participate in the hiring process? And if so, do you have a go-to interview question?
Well, first answer is yes. I participate in every single hire. I don't have a go-to question per se, but I do have things that I look for. If we bring somebody in for an interview, they are already qualified. We are no longer asking them, can you answer this question correctly, right? What we look for is how do they solve a problem? We ask them hypothetical questions. A lot of it is around grid modeling and other things like that. But it's like, okay, well, how would you go about solving this problem? Who would you work with? Who would you pull in? Those types of things. And then honestly, at the end of the day, because we are small companies, but I think that translates to any company, are you a jerk or not? The company culture in some ways is a little bit more important than the X's and O's. You can't be the smartest guy in the room or gal in the room and but like insist on doing everything yourself. And I know culture is important for everyone. I get that. But we're actually at a stage in our company where we can affect it in a meaningful way, which where I think you get to hundreds of employees, you can have ways to build culture, but you can't really influence it, certainly not from the top down, the way that we can today. And we assume that the people we bring in today are going to be leaders of this company, in the future. And so hiring the right person versus like the right skills is in some ways more important to us.
Let me ask you about marketing and AI. Now, you mentioned that you don't have a marketing team. How do you get new business if you're not doing marketing?
Well, so a couple. So I have a marketing background myself, and I used to run those disciplines in previous companies. So both Matt and I and several of our other team members, we've been around for a long time. And you stick around long enough, you get to know a lot of people. We can typically get to any organization or utility and get to the right person. And more often than not, we already know that right person. And we've tried very hard not to be jerks throughout our careers, so they usually take the call. And so we've found that for a couple of reasons, beyond our network in general, which is pretty good, we show up with a solution. We are not an IPP, and gosh, I love them. I've worked for them, right? But we're not an IPP showing up trying to sell them another wind project or another solar project or whatever, or shove something down their throats, right? We show up with a solution to a problem that they know they have. They all know they need more transmission. They also all know they can't do it themselves. They don't have the resources internally to do it. They don't have the people to do it. And they certainly don't get the go ahead from the regulators to go and spend a bunch of at risk money on development. So the service we provide is all of that, right? We will take that early stage risk. We will put our money to work. We know that if we don't deliver, we lost that money. And we have the resources to actually go and execute on getting these lines done. And so what we found when we go in there and we'll talk about and say, hey, we have a couple of ideas for your system here, here, and here, they'll roll out their maps and they'll say, yep, like that one. This one's fine. However, over here would be better. If we can just have that back and forth, which I think is a forgotten art, frankly, in our industry as well, you get a long ways.
In recruiting, what kind of job titles are you looking for when you're hiring?
Yeah, I mean, it runs again. Like again, we have 13 people, so it's but like we recently hired a vice president of grid modeling.
Okay.
We have a couple of senior directors. We hired a CFO. Then we've been very successful with hiring interns. We over this past summer had 3 interns, and at least two of them are going to come on board full time.
Wow. That's
They're
terrific.
super talented. They work hard. What we like about it, besides don't necessarily pay a premium for them, but we get an opportunity to mentor them and really sort of shape them in the way that works for our company. We don't have to break them of old habits, whether they be good or bad.
Nice. I love that. I'm going to switch gears again here. I want to talk about learning and development. So, Is there any professional training in your past, book you've read, anything like that that was influential to you that you would recommend to our listeners?
For me, I think the most inspiration and where I learned the most and what I've then sort of repeated since is, gosh, about a decade ago or more, I was part of a team that permitted the first wind farm in Florida. Before I went down there, the head of development for the southeastern region gave me a book called A Land Remembered. And it's a book that all school children in Florida read at some point. And it's essentially, follows a character, but it is essentially like how Florida came about. And what it did for me is just really bring forward a lot of like how Floridians think. How did the Native Americans and the settlers sort of mesh? How do all these relationships work? The sugarcane growers, all of these types of different things. And it spans decades, this book. What I started doing after that is every time I'd go to a new area, a new project area, I would find a book that about the local area, and not just like a textbook, but like more like a novel, something I could really read and dig into. And that's helped me tremendously over the years, just understanding local culture, or at least get a sense for it. So when you are in a conversation with someone, you can make an offhanded reference to something and they'll be like, what? Like, you know about that? And it just makes a big difference, when you meet people where they are, and you sort of have an appreciation for where they came from.
There is this sense, especially from rural communities, when a developer comes in, that you're not from here, right? You're not like us. And so taking the time to really appreciate, get to know, understand, respect, identify, what are the cultural norms? What are the rituals they have? So I'm going to ask, I have just a couple more questions. As the CEO, you probably work a ton of hours. What do you do in your personal life or at work to maintain that daily performance as a CEO?
Yeah, it could be a difficult balance. I am pretty religious about protecting, time with my kids and my wife. So there are certain times a day where it's just sort of like I put the phone down, right? And it's dinner time, or I coach my son's soccer team, or I go horseback riding with my daughter. But I had to learn that the hard way, to be honest. I used to just be work, 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 and then suddenly, your kids are, 4 or 6, and they can walk and talk, and you're like, gosh, shoot, like, and they have needs, and you find that you have need for them too. And so that's really, really helpful in terms of balancing those things. I spend a lot of time riding my horse. So that's something I'm sort of really passionate about, but it's a place where I find peace. And we travel a fair bit when we can.
Nice. And what about your team? How do you keep them motivated? How do you keep them going, especially when times can be tough?
From day one, number one, created incentives for all the team members, to take ownership of the company. So they all have a vested interest in the success of the company, not just the company, and not the old, hey, if we're successful 15 years from now and you're still here, you'll get a couple of $100. Like, it's each and every project that we have, they are all invested in. Our team gets paid out on any project we sell before anyone else. That includes our investors, Matt and I, anyone else. So we found a way to sort of put them up front, because we think that is always something that I think companies have had a hard time doing, or maybe even appreciating. And so outside of their annual bonuses and that sort of thing, they actually have a real vested interest in each project, whether you are the office manager or the lead developer. We're sort of spread out, but we bring everybody into town at least, every other month for a few days. And we try to make it a healthy mix of social activities, and a bit of work, but really a big emphasis on the social piece. This summer, we're going to take everybody out to a dude ranch out in Colorado,
Oh,
which is
man.
it's pretty close to one of our projects. So, we'll do some of that too. We'll get out in the field. Everybody sort of get to touch and feel,
Dual
They've got
use.
projects, but it's also just like, hey, like we're all working very hard. We're doing something pretty cool, we think, but we want to make sure that everybody, feels that they truly are a part of the team. I think also the more people get to know each other as people, the further they will go for each other.
I like it. Very good. All right, my last question for you is, has the work that you've been doing, has it left you a climate optimist or a climate pessimist, and why?
Probably a little bit of both. I think we are too late. We have put too many obstacles in our way in terms of whether it's building out transmission, renewables, all of it. And this is on a global level, but just even in the US, like we're not going to meet our climate goals, right? The West has like 12 or 13 states, very aggressive, climate goals. And over the next 10 years, none of them are going to get there. I think that is a real problem and challenge. I think it's probably the most important challenge of our lifetime. And if we don't find a way to solve it, it's not going to affect you and I, but it's not going to be a whole many generations down the line before it does. And so they will not think of us kindly. That said, I also believe and see that more and more people, politics aside, believe that not only is it real, but we can do something about it. And I think the younger generations are far more conscientious about most things than we are. So I think in terms of that, I think there's promise there. I think there's hope there. Technology obviously advances as well. Various efficiencies in energy and so forth. So I don't know that we're completely SOL'd, but it's not currently looking great, I guess is what I would say.
Yeah, I can relate to what you're saying, Yen. I've been working on climate for over 20 years, and I have to say the younger me is different than the older, more experienced me. But every day I see things that give me hope. So
I've definitely become more of a cynic with age. I'm not sure that's healthy.
I think it's just part of life. Well, I really enjoyed speaking with you, and so many things of what you said I think are valuable to be shared with the industry. And I personally benefit so much from talking to CEOs like you. I feel like I'm constantly reflecting on the advice that folks like you give me, and it just makes us all better. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of Scaling Clean, the podcast for clean economy CEOs, investors, and the people who advise them. I'm your host, Melissa Baldwin. Our producer is Claire Quirin. If you like what you hear on Scaling Clean episodes, we'd appreciate it if you'd give us a 5-star rating and leave a comment where you get your podcast. And until next time, we wish you all the best in the clean economy transition.